I think we're here. Welcome to our new Earthwalk Ways podcast. I'm Darlene Rollins, and I have a little retreat here in Virginia, and I love to share everything about Earthwalk. So I'm sorry, I am just I hear I was on Zoom, and I'm getting like uh, double thing. So I think I thought this right the last time, but it's not working now. I'm gonna just go ahead and try to continue this way, where I'm not also receiving my own live stream. I think that must be the problem, and I'll just uh, stay with this broadcast on Zoom. So anyway, uh, forgive me for my lack of computer skills here. I'm not all that native to all of this technology, but I feel like I do have some things to share, and would hope to have some guests in the future. I'm still learning how to respond to you. So since I'm not even on the live stream, feel free to make comments. I would love to read them later, but I probably am not going to yet be able to respond to you live. So I got to figure all of that out yet. So anyway, um, we're kind of introducing this channel by doing what I love to do best, which is to kind of dance with the medicine wheel, especially of the seasons. And I think I've mentioned before that, this concept of this medicine wheel, this, mandala that contains all of life, all of nature, all of everybody, everything, the wholeness of the oneness of uh, all in that we are aware of. And that includes both the seen and the unseen worlds. And it also, is like not only a totality, but it's like a moving wheel, a cycle, and even a spiral. So the concept of the medicine wheel is the idea that it's like one grows and evolves by experiencing life from all of the perspectives on the medicine wheel. And that also uh, life naturally takes these journeys and brings us around that wheel to experience each of the different, what they call directions, but they're also the different qualities and aspects of time. So it's a totality of uh, kind of a womb holding all creation, um, and it's also the development of that creation through time and the processes that time puts us through. And by that, in some ways, I mean, that we don't have, at least on our earthly experience, an unlimited amount of time. And so as we come into this time of the year, the season of autumn, of the fall, particularly right before Halloween, we're talking here about a kind of true recognition of the endings of things, right? That we have life, but we also have death, and if we're in balance, it's not life versus death; it's life and death, and then death brings about rebirth, and so there's a larger perspective. But this is a very beautiful, powerful, important time in the medicine wheel of the seasons, um, to be like sort of here in this northwest. And it's a kind of cross quarter time, uh, that what we call Halloween and what probably arose from the Celtic tradition of Samhain is sort of one of the major celebrations of this time and a marking of this crossroads of this, cross connection between the fall and the winter. And we're halfway through the season of fall, and there's a kind of definite shift and transition. So, anyway, let me back up and just talk a little bit. Fall is a powerful time on the medicine wheel, and we've shared some of the earth wisdom on that on our last podcast. But we're going to continue in that vein, and we're here now approaching this cross quarter day, and it's the south or the northwest in the direction of the medicine wheel, which is halfway through, our time of fall. And we had the fall equinox that started us, and then it's the, winter solstice that will complete that section of our journey. And so, we're approaching, coming closer to winter solstice time. The nights are getting longer, the leaves are falling off of the trees, so we're deep in this transition time that we call fall. And so this direction is a direction of in between, and it's actually the in between direction. So, like this one, and there's one in the southeast, and the northeast, the southeast, the southwest, and the northwest. So, in these directions, we know about the direction of the north and the south and the uh, east and the west, but this is these cross quarter times, and they are always times of the transitions in between the seasonal time frames. And so they're also understood as this process of being sort of at transitions and at crossings, at times of crossings in our life, times of change, development, so often, initiatory times of life that we undergo that changes things, right? That we complete one part of our cycle and move into another one. So there's in the southeast is the season of Beltane, or the ceremony of Beltane, somewhere in May, usually around the 1st of May. In the southwest, it's Lammas around 2nd of August, and then in the northeast is Imbolc, is like early spring, the time of lambs, and that's the movement in the belly is what Imbolc means, right? So deep down, still life is stirring, and then now we are here at Samhain. It's also sort of in our tradition referred to as Halloween or Hallowmass, um, and is connected with All Souls and All Saints Days. Also, it's like one of those times that has converged, and many traditions sort of celebrate in similar ways. Interestingly, so these transition times are very powerful, and especially like the northwest and the southeast, they're like the two main hinges of the year, Beltane and Samhain. And Samhain, was considered the completion of the year, and November 1st was sort of the beginning of the new year, or at least the dark half of the year. And this is reversed, of course, in the southern hemisphere. So, there a lot of times it's around May that you have the Feast of the Dead, or, this kind of similar transition time, but it's a little bit a mere opposite between the northern and southern hemispheres. So, but Halloween, even though it's been commercialized in the West, it would be good to reclaim it in a way, because it's a truly profound time to honor and work in ceremony. And ceremony is very important for an earth-centered, soul-centered life. And it needs to be relevant ceremony. Ideally, it needs to be, community and well spoken, like felt, touched. So we're not just doing something rote, but it's something that, can really transport us in a way into mythic time, into a deeper aspect of ourselves. And so at some point, we'll probably do another video on ceremony and how to work with ceremony and its importance. But for now, let's look at this time of year and this place on the medicine wheel of the seasons. So this hinge moves the year from its light half into the dark half. And we, know this as a time of harvest. So the harvesting of a season or of a life, right? So of the spring planting or, a whole lifetime. It's good to see these concepts as sort of multi-leveled. And so this is the time actually when the veil between the world of the incarnate and the world of spirit, or the world of the seen and the unseen, the world of the fairies and the world of the, nature spirits and that kind of thing, are like this is a time when that veil thins. It's also true in the day of the medicine wheel daytime, day cycle. It's in the evening time, right? Which is also the kind of same direction in this time of the Southwest or of the Northwest, and the transition between uh, fall and winter, between the the evening and the nighttime. And so we really want to take advantage of connecting with this time and use it to help us also tune in and open, into more of our inner senses. Our sometimes people call them psychic senses, or our high sense perceptions, our subtle senses, right? And and we often are just distracted and too busy to tune in. And so we may not even know that we have such information or such awareness within us. And so again, fall can be a very busy time of, getting the harvest done and stuff like that, but it needs to also be interspersed with times of reflection and times of just, connecting in the moment, in the presence of the spirit of the fall, and, whatever energies might be around you in the moment. Um, so it's a kind of time for us to remember and appreciate our own harvest, the harvest of our own lives for this year, even, all the way back to, our story, the beginning of our story. And also to like remember and seat ourselves or ground ourselves more deeply in our legacy and inheritance from our lineage. It's often understood to be the time of ancestors, right? To celebrate and honor and give thanks to our ancestors. And, sometimes we have, different relationships with our ancestors, sometimes maybe not so great, but there's a way in which I think they also, in their journeys, are more expanded and have a wider viewpoint on the other side than they do now. And so sometimes they are our guides, or they try to help us, but mostly they did their best, and in our deeper understanding of the soul journey, we even come to see, how, we chose them, for their qualities, and sometimes the challenging qualities that they had was relevant to our own mission and our own intentions and journey. And so we begin to, have a larger understanding of what we're standing on, and the foundations that have led us to have the lives that we have. And again, they may not be, fabulous, great lives. Many people on earth are still in difficult straits and struggle and, have many challenges and problems. But it's all really a part of our own awakening and how our own learning curve works, and, our free will choices. So, um, we also hopefully will, gain a broader perspective on the other side. So this is a time also to honor that and to sort of just allow ourselves to go into introspection and, seek to see ourselves more clearly, seek to understand our story, seek to see, what we brought in for healing. And there's a way that this self-knowledge, this deep introspection is a beautiful and strong part of the path and is definitely connected with this season of the Northwest. And so what we want to do is, kind of look a little deeper at some of the information on Samhain. And it's interesting because there's like a very lot of information out there. I wanted to just like bring up the uh, Wikipedia article and see, kind of just give us a whole basic. Sorry, I can't do two things at once. I'm terrible at it. I watch people do this online and I don't know how they do it. So, um, can't even spell that because it's spelled so weird. I want to spell it the way it sounds. Okay. So yeah, and I think there's a way as well that I could share this screen, and I don't know if people enjoy that or not. So you can let me know if you would, rather also see it and kind of then just have me read it. But I'm going to right now just read a little bit in general about this particular celebration. And a lot of the celebrations of this time of year, including our Halloween, I think are connected back to these traditions. So it's spelled Samhain, which is very confusing, but it is pronounced Samhain or Samhain, depending on, I think there's Scottish and Gaelic pronunciations, and there may be some other names for this as well. And it's a Gaelic festival on the 1st of November, marking the end of harvest season and the beginning of winter, or the darker half of the year. It is also the Irish and Scottish Gaelic time and name for November, right? So uh, it's kind of like this whole month in some ways. Celebrations begin on the evening of October 31st. And since the Celtic day begin and end at sunset, which is true of, many of the ancient calendar studies, is that the day actually began at sunset the evening before. So then that brings us to the evening of October 31st, which is when we celebrate Halloween and people go out and do their trick or treating and their Halloween celebrations. So it's October 1st and November, or 31st and November 1st is about halfway between the autumnal equinox and winter solstice, and it is one of the four Gaelic seasonal festivals. We talked a little bit about that. So um, it's believed to have had a Celtic pagan origin, and maybe some Neolithic passage tombs in Great Britain and Ireland are also aligned with the sunrise at the time of Samhain. So, in the ancient days, like again, the medicine wheel was the horizon around them, right? And the rising and the setting of the sun. And so especially, at this time, and oftentimes burials and, graves were facing the setting sun direction, right? And so, as a festival for communing with the ancestors, it may predate the Celtic era. A number of stone circles and dolmens, including, for example, Everbury, exhibit a southwestern alignment and the azimuth angle of the setting sun on the 31st of October. Samhain is mentioned in the earliest Irish literature from the 9th century and is associated with many important events in Irish mythology. The early literature says Samhain was marked by great gatherings and feasts, and was when the ancient burial mounds were opened, which were seen as portals to the other world. Some of the literature also associates Samhain with bonfires and sacrifices. The festival was not recorded in detail until early modern era. It was when cattle were brought down from the summer pastures and livestock were slaughtered. Special bonfires were lit, which were deemed to have protective and cleansing powers, and that's a general theme as well at this time of year. It was a liminal or threshold festival when the boundary line between this world and the other world blurred, making contact with the spirits or fairies more likely. Most scholars see them as remnants of pagan gods, perhaps, but I don't know. The nature spirits, it's like I think we have to see through these more ancient eyes to fully understand, what they're referring to. But again, it's the unseen world, so the ancestors and the spirits of nature and the fairies are all more present for us now, and we can kind of tune in. So I would really recommend people try to go out into the woods, especially of an evening time, in this fall, and like just listen deeply, tune in, notice how the breeze might be moving the leaves in the trees and the critters acting around you. I mean, they all like can kind of help us tune in to the presences. And I always talk about, like the more present we get in a natural situation, in a natural setting, especially through our sensory, right? And also connecting through the heart, because that's our largest electromagnetic um, vortex, and it's like I think it's really a sensory, electromagnetic sensory organ. So we can be present most fully, not in our mind, but through our heart. And that's something that the indigenous peoples understood as well. So you can kind of just explore, being out there and connecting through your heart to all that's around you and opening all of your senses, which are also connected to the heart. They're here and now, and they help us activate our self in presence, right? The part of us that just can be very, present to what's here. And the more present we get, the more present what's here gets back. And you will be astonished at, even people like me that I'm very, limited in my perceiving capacities and, other registers, so to speak. But, like I have a deep intuitive sense, or I, really feel, things as they are kind of speaking or gathering or moving or, you know, healing in their own ways. And so, yeah, sometimes we're so used to the bombardment of our outer culture that it takes a little while to be still in nature, to come into this greater stillness. Vision quests are great for that. It's getting a little cold, but might still be time if people might want to try one. But it's like there's a way that we need to immerse ourselves in nature without all of the input and cacophony around us of the human world, and that will begin also to help us deepen and be more present and aware of these subtle levels of things. So in the 19th century, the Western Church endorsed the 1st of November as the date of All Saints' Day, and that was possibly due to the influence of the Irish missionaries. And then November 2nd later became All Souls Day. So it's believed that Samhain and All Saints, All Souls kind of influence each other. And then there's the modern Halloween. And most American Halloween traditions seem to be inherited from this Irish and Scottish immigrants that came. So that kind of gives us, I think, a basic understanding of the background. But let's take a look also, like just at, our culture in a way. There's a kind of, in the West, I think we have a kind of ancestor worship, but it's kind of around honoring our Disneyfied versions of our founding fathers and our ancestors in that way. Um, it's hard for us to, honor the whole person or not put on a pedestal. And then it seems like it's a little different. I mean, I think there is a way of being grateful and thankful, for our ancestors, and also even grateful for, the healing wounds they gave us, right? There's a way that without the wounds we wouldn't be able to heal, and so we almost, hire them to be our good enemies that are gonna activate our difficulties so that we can, focus on what we came here to do as souls. But there is this sort of juvenile ancestor worship that we still are involved in, historically. And I think that's a part of what's happening in this day and age is all of our sort of agreed on histories, many cracks in all of that and many positions, and who knows how many of them have any validity at all, but people seeing history through very many different lenses and sort of rewriting history, and people are, I think, like struggling a little bit to integrate all of this. And I'm not even sure that that's the journey, but somehow, I think it does help for us in this time to, find our own center and find our own inner authority and, do the best we can to simply find our truth and to try to speak that with love, and, try to avoid the temptation, to kind of be activated in this way. But again, it's a little bit in line with the time of the seasons, and sometimes like the full feeling of all of our feelings, it's connected with water, and this direction is often connected with the canyon, the chasm, like sort of the uh, challenging fast water flows, of the floods and of the things that carry us away, in a torrent of energy. And again, it has its place, right? And yet it has its consequences. And so we're, I think, learning a little bit about how to navigate, these strong waters of the West. And it's part of like waters are connected with emotion, right? The realm of emotion. And so, like, at the ending of things, we need to be able to grieve. We need to be able to uh, say goodbye and come to eventually an acceptance and surrender to that loss in order to continue on. And so in our culture, we are not so very good at supporting this grief process. It seems that, it makes everybody uncomfortable. They just want us to buck up, get over it as soon as possible, get right back to work, like not be weak by, and it can be, the grief of a lost loved one or somebody died, but it can also be, like all kinds of losses, even our pets. And, certainly, experiences where we, felt a loss of love or, some kind of hurt, right? All of these things, I think, are appropriate to grieve. And of course, there's states and stages of grieving that, sometimes include anger. I mean, again, it's not the end goal, but sometimes if we can find a safe way to just express our truth and discharge that anger, again, ideally not in the direction that you might want to aim it because you'll regret that later. But, in your own sacred space, maybe someplace outdoors, like uh, you can even, take branches and kind of hit them against rocks or whatever, like find ways of physically expressing your anger, stamping, raging, kind of things. Because if you can just, again, it's not like making it up or, getting stuck in your victim story where you want to, complain about it, but just simply feeling the fullness of the energy that needs to express, that can be very cleansing. And it can take you from one level to the next. So if you're in anger, like cleanly speaking that anger, for your own purposes to move that energy can often drop you into what's underneath that, which is the hurt. And ultimately that's where the grief is the healing process, is that it can, transform the ins and the losses and the hurts of these aspects of life and into fertilizer, into, rather than taking us down, rather than making us helpless or hopeless, you know, that we find that inner yes that comes back again. And we are not stuffing it, we're not trying to rise over the top of it. Um, but we're willing to kind of like meet it and be with it and go into, through, and out the other side. So another way that, people are having sort of renewed interest in ancestry these days is because of the genomic projects, ancestry.com and 23andMe and all of that. I guess they're not doing so great right now, but it is interesting that, people are curious, like, and we are such melting pots, and we can now go back in time so far into our, ancestry. So, that I think is kind of neat. And then also, even more recently, we have all these digital photos, and maybe we've even digitalized, some of our historical photos of our families and stuff like that. But that's relatively new that we, have this photo record of historical kinds of things. And so, there's a way that we are, more present with our ancestry now in some ways. In fact, it almost feels like everybody, like all the timelines of all of the histories of all of the cultures of the planet are all here now. I mean, it's kind of startling when you think about it that way, because it feels like, there's some group of people that are still living, out that particular perspective, that particular timeline, that particular, aspect of understanding in this world. And so it's like somehow all of the timelines are converging here in this now moment, which I'm not sure how it's going to work out, but it, does seem like that, and maybe it's part of this larger plan that I definitely believe is, unfolding. So, we're basically a very, very young country, and even Western civilization is overall fairly young, and in some senses it's very immature, and it's like almost like we're sort of like at a collective level of adolescence. In the adolescence, basically their center of gravity in this sort of soul-centric way of looking at it, this comes from Bill Puckins' material, is like their own peer group, right? And so, and we're also sort of like exploring all these different roles and possibilities, right? And so it's a very creative time, but a deeper understanding of history, our legacy, our foundation, um, could probably help us ground this a lot, right? And there's a way that our culture doesn't support that so much, and we kind of all are rejecting that in various ways or various aspects of it, right? Um, and so I think if we can follow our own, like familial history, our own legacy, our own ancestry, our own lineages, I think that might be an interesting way to kind of work with all of this as well. And I think this also can help us challenge some of our purely materialistic notions of life. because like when we're connected and really thinking about, our foundations, where we came from, where even, much of the Earthwalk retreat, is built on, some inheritance from my parents. So, and then all the support that I was given, even though maybe it was not always perfect, right? It got me here. And when I think of, yeah, my grandparents and that, I see a kind of lineage, of both good and bad, but, very, very personal, uh, and in many ways, to see myself in them and to see them in me, I think is a grounding and connecting thing for us as well. So at this point in time, with the thinning of the veil, it might be just more natural that, you'll have some sense, maybe dreams, right? That you are having more dreams about your maybe deceased parents or loved ones, or maybe you're just remembering them more as you go about the community chores, right? In some ways, a lot of the chores that we have at this time of year are sort of decorating and preparing for harvest feasts, and in that system, we usually are celebrating with family, and so there's this, inheritance or legacy of recipes, of, decorations, of traditions for these holidays that can be understood as part of our inheritance and our lineage. And it's a beautiful time to reconnect with that. Or to make your own, right? To find ones that really speak to you now and to, bring them into the family. So, or just into your own, system. But the thinning of the veil is also allowing, for more of the suffering or the restless spirits that are said to inhabit the lower astral to kind of make themselves more known, and in ways can make us feel grouchy or heavy or negative in some aspects as well, um, but also, there's sometimes we can actually help for, these suffering spirits to cross over. We need to be careful because some obsessor spirits can attach to us. And if we're not clean and well prepared, we can kind of get ourselves in trouble. But, that's other aspects of this thinning veil. And sort of like we often think of all of our feelings as ours, and we're in this discrete self. And we don't really realize that, our thoughts, everything is energy, and everything is interconnected, and maybe our dark thoughts, may have something to do with, where our inner atmosphere, our inner barometer is resting. But oftentimes, it's like it's not our thoughts, right? Where there are many beings that are around us, and many beings that are connected to us and that are, aspects of us. And it's like almost impossible to, I don't know, maybe somebody wants to sort it all out. It doesn't seem to matter. And what I can tell, in the most part, I mean, it's good to try to sense, what we're working with energetically. But, in many ways, the same kind of thing is required, and the same process is happening. And we're doing this work of integration, and we're doing this work of sort of like not getting tangled up in the victimization and the suffering thoughts, and and remembering, this larger context in which the soul is here in its very personalized and unique study, right? It's almost like everybody is doing their own special study program here. And so you've worked with your advisors and you've tailor made, all of the challenges and the situations and the, limitations and the strengths that you have. I think it's all a part of a larger journey. And, like we come and we do our best. And of course, it's not so easy. When we get here, we discover it can be quite challenging. And also, like how we often see things because we don't really understand everything that's happening, or, like kind of look through a keyhole and we don't see the larger context of things. And so we can easily get lost in some kind of judgment, often that we see, reflected in the culture, um, which is probably good to be questioning, right? Whatever those thought forms and judgments are, because I think most of them are not true. Uh, there might be discernment within them that can be useful, but we're sort of like learning that our thoughts can also be a form of spiritual possession, right? And I think many people have experienced that, and some people also, when they take the plant medicines, are all of a sudden struck by how intense this, voice inside of them that's just kind of like always unhappy with them and correcting them and angry at them, and I don't know, it's like so part of what we're doing in this time is all this deep introspection and this deep way of working the direction of looking in the West is looking within, and looking at the stories that we're telling ourselves. Again, the Native Americans say, choose your stories wisely, for in the telling they begin to happen. So and another form of possession, in a sense, is how the dynamics of both parents become interjected into our own field. So in the path work, we learn that it's kind of part of our soul task and process to unify the often opposing attributes of our parents and balance them within us and integrate them within us. And, as we do that, it also helps, the lineage heal, because oftentimes these are, things that are passed through the lineages and are, representative of some of the distortions in the lineage. And so we're coming in, like to work with those and to heal them. And so we heal them for ourselves and we heal them for others. But if we really know, more of who we are, and we are uh, studying within us our own inner splits, right? Because they actually then are interjected into us and become our own inner conflicts within our own self. And so they are really living, we're living through the combined aspects, of our parents, and they're living through the combined aspects of their parents as well. And so we're always sort of doing this healing work at the level of the lineage. And recently we've also learned that our DNA expresses and passes down epigenetic traits, which include our responses to collective trauma and world conditions. So, in some ways, to really know who we are, it helps to know this, ancestral foundations and what our people might have gone through, even if we don't know like a lot of historical specifics. We can guess about the times maybe or something. And also, like, as we, feel what we're carrying within us, we might be able to roll that back in time and see how it makes some sense when we see, the experiences that our parents or our grandparents or great grandparents went through. So, another forgotten aspect of our ancestry is the foundation of our planet. And we tend to think of human ancestry, right? And how far back do humans go? But, we couldn't be here without the entire, ancestry of the planet and everything that has been developed that's led to the emergence of, first of all, in a sense, our earliest plant ancestors, maybe our earliest bacterial ancestors and viral ancestors, like there's, this early form of life that began and that everything has built upon. And I like to play with this term, plant ancestors. It's limiting because, we have fungi and other kinds of ancestors as well that are, different than our uh, animal ancestors. But that's what we've mostly focused on is kind of tracing back even our, the lineage of in the tree of life, right, through the lines of animals that have, come out of and evolved and maybe also, uh, you know, gone extinct. But there's this whole tree of life that actually is our true ancestry. And and then, when I walk out into the woods and just feel the earth underneath my feet, I know like that's our, the tree ancestors, right? The literal ancestors of the trees that are, decomposed and part of the soil I'm standing on and give food for the invertebrates and the worms and like the whole thing is just held, and such a creative, vibrant and amazing kind of lineage that we have, right? So if we can kind of ground ourselves in our ultimate natural lineage of the sun and the moon and the stars, the earth, the wind and the sea, the whole of the cosmos is what gave birth to us. And while we may die as individuals, and in some ways, I think that that's actually a part of the beauty of the journey, and we may not fully appreciate it, and it's hard to when we don't know that it's just this body that dies, right? It's not our nature, it's not our soul, it's not our whole being, but it's kind of like a suit that we've worn and it's ready to be exchanged for another suit. And so when we can, really live fully the life that we've been given, and then we will feel complete and, deeply appreciative and, happy to have lived, but we don't feel any remorse, any regret, any unfinished business, any things that, uh, we are hung up on. And so that allows the life to be, simply surrendered and a very peaceful way. Um, and the soul itself, right, is in a much healthier uh, birthing into the spirit world, where it can then integrate all that it learned here, and really deepen into it, and then go on, then many possibilities of what one continues to do, I think, in uh, the many mansions of the creation. So, yeah, it's like all of this is, here, this fall time, this seasonal time, right? It's a time to remember, to recognize and to reconnect. And um, so you're also surrounded by all kinds of electromagnetic energies, and we don't see those or sense those with so much our biological senses, at least consciously. We may know them unconsciously, but we're linked back in time and are intertwined almost moment by moment by breathing in the air that the plants are breathing out, right? So and then there's just this amazing connection and exchange that's ongoing in the present moment, but then it's also like this deep pyramid or, root that goes down into time, like something going into the center of the earth and rooting there and receiving, the strength of all of that foundation. So Halloween, as we know it right now, is a pretty diminished ceremony. but I think it still speaks of a time of shape shifting. Like in some ways it's great taking on different roles and characters, and including the shadow aspects of life and death, right? Um, I think it's a time of acknowledging, all of this diversity and all of this, all these various life forms and, you know, parts of creation. And it's also, I think, a time for invoking magic, the protection and the health for the coming dark times. And so you might want to, take and create your own personalized little Halloween ceremony this year. Um, do some of this introspection of this reaping of the harvest and the sorting out, your life over the last year, and set aside some quiet contemplative time to reflect on all the forces that have shaped you, even going back to, your earliest memories or your earliest understanding of where you came from. And, you know, where are you now? And how does that inform your own unique soul journey story? And then what we also like to do in the fall is sit around a fire and tell the stories of the myths of the ancestors, of the, histories of ourselves and of everything that we're aware of that's around us, right? And so it's a great time for coming together and, learning the lore and the ways of the ancestors and of the traditions of the community. So in all of these ways, right, that it's a beautiful practice, and I think it will help also for our adolescent consciousness, right, to be informed. There's also this time of um, what do they call it, like confirmation in adolescence, right, where you're sort of your initiation into the tribe, into the clan, into the traditions. And there's a lodge called the Mediums and the Singers where they say, you need to take a history in order to prophesy the future, right? So we're sitting right in this time where, we really do need to seek if we can understand and find the truth of our stories, of our histories, and our, then out of that, who are we? What do we stand for? What do we bring to birth here and now? And, so it's really a time, to take an initiation in some sense. And for many people, it's not a voluntary one. We have the government closed down, lots of things going on, lots of shaking. And so people may be kind of being pushed into a descent, into a little death. The Pathwork Guide says, like in life we have lots of little deaths, disappointments, things don't work out. We lose people and things and dreams, and all of those are practice for the big death. And so many of us right now may be, in this time of dying or facing the things that, is a deep loss in our life, and maybe even just, our kids growing up and leaving home, right? So it doesn't have to be a terribly terrible thing, but there are all these losses that we face, and this is part of this time, this season in our life, in the year, in the day. And so, we can uh, work with this time of feeling our grief and seeking the acceptance of life on its own terms and the integration of everything we're experiencing. We can't avoid our own ultimate death, and this is a great teacher for us. And that we run from, right? But we're always going to fall behind, and life is going to take us there no matter what. So it's easier for us if we have some practice and if we can work with these little deaths and we can honor this journey of death and we can face this descent process. Our culture and it's another aspect of its adolescence is it's always ascending, right? And it avoids the descent. But without the descent, you don't have wisdom, right? You don't have compassion. You don't have a grounded experience of life. And so my sense is that not only in this year, but maybe even in this kind of collective season of, our world, of our United States, of all of that, that we're also kind of in this Northwest time. And so, things are ending, are dying, are, you know, preparing, to go into this darker part of the year, and maybe like for a little while in the collective, maybe a few years or something, where we're going to make a journey, again, sort of revisiting, the timelines and the truths and the realities, so that we can maybe make a final choice within of the life that we want to lead, and you know how we will choose to be here. And I think we're gonna be helped a lot by the unseen worlds, not only of the fairies or the ancestors, but the angels and the guides and the saints and the masters, right? They're all here as well, helping illuminate us and helping guide us through this transitional time that, again, is not just of this year, but I think ultimately of a whole maybe 26,000 year period of history, or I don't know, but a big time frame. We're really in a huge central transition that's bigger than just the annual cycles. So we also are creating all kinds of illusory deaths, right? That in our own unconscious, that it's part of what we're doing is facing them to discover that that is what they are, is illusion, right? And you can't ever, break the spell of illusion without facing it. So, there's a lot of maybe taking us now, into our biggest fears, into our illusion of death. And for a while it may be exciting, but in doing that, that's where we will create the new and find the new, know the new way, and recognize, oh, that was just an illusion. That was a box that they trapped us in. That was, a lie that we believed was the truth. And so, you know, maybe abundance flows in a different way, and there will be a fullness of abundance instead of this hierarchy and this limited abundance that people are experiencing and stuff like that. Also, like, death again is such a deep study, right? And so in the Buddhist tradition, it's recommended that people actually meditate in a morgue, right? And I think also somehow going into nature in the fall, you have that sense of the dying of the year and the dying back of the vegetation, and the, you know, fallen logs on the ground and the bare limbs of the trees. And so, that can be something similar. You might even find, an animal that is dying or decomposing or something. And there's this way in which, we it's very difficult. It's where duality begins, good death, or yes to life, no to death, right? Our inner conflict. And so it's no small thing to embrace life and death, um, but it's very healing. And the more that we can do that, the easier we can move through the inevitable times that are going to bring us, the fall and the winter of life. So it's also a time of remembering the joy of lost relationships and, the missing of loved ones. So there's kind of that poignant, feeling of, happy remembrance and yet the pain of loss at the same time. And also for our animal friends who gave so much to our lives, And so you may, call to mind those that you do remember that have touched your life and just honor them in some small ceremony of acknowledgement and recognition, sending well wishes and blessings their way. Some traditions we actually, leave food out for the spirits, for the dead, you know, and so that's an interesting, assuming that they don't actually eat the food, the animals can eat the food, but also that they do receive nutrition maybe from the energies of the food. And since they're here now through the veil, they're more connecting, they have a little more material substance, I think, in them, and that can also, be a support for them. So you might, see about putting an altar outside with some food for the invisible spirits. Um, I understand they like tobacco as well. There's many different things that you can leave, but uh, yeah, you probably don't want to attract, critters that if you're like in the city or something where rats and stuff would come. But, it might be something that you can even do just in your house, make a little altar, and then you can throw it out in your compost or out, in the trash after you're done. So again, it's honoring the losses, honoring the crossroads, honoring the people that we've, crossed paths with in our lives, living and dead. And so again, a very powerful time to really remember, bring back, and reconnect with your understanding of your soul journey and everything that's informed that, touched that. So we're, doing some deep dives at the Earthwalk retreat this fall, as we come up to the solstice time. So let me just share a little bit, and then it's about time to wind up. So we're doing uh, a weekend workshop on the Sacred Story Soul Journey coming up on the 8th and 9th of November. And so, right along the lines with these themes and doing this introspection, and so we'll also be hopefully doing these weekend workshops every other month. So in January and March and in May, we'll also try a weekend here that will be, with the cross-quarter themes, and also looking at the pathwork process in terms of our soul journey. So hopefully we can remember, who we are by knowing where we've come from and what called us here, and to connect more fully with our longing and our capacities of light and love, and even, accepting our difficulties. We can basically support each other in gathering the courage for the road to come, and being the resources for each other. So group work is very powerful and very important at this time. Do a little bit online. It's even better to be in person. So I encourage people to find some in person, and not just a social club or something, but a deep in person, place to share your soul journey. Um, and then the weekend after that, we're going to be holding our Falling into Winter Lodge, right? So we'll, actually do this journey around the medicine wheel and focus on this northwest direction and going into the north, um, and completing our journey of the lodges around the medicine wheel as well. I find that it's always a very beautiful ceremony outside, connecting with all of nature, building a big bonfire to heat the stones, covering the saplings that make the frame for the lodge, carrying the stones into the center of the pit and placing herbs on the stones, and then, making that journey, through the around the wheel, right? In this kind of guided imagery. So it's a beautiful process, and we sing and we pray and we, greet each of the directions and honor them, and kind of honor them from the direction that is the, main direction that we're in during that time. And then on solstice, we're going to include our uh, a breath work, which is a beautiful ceremony of going very deep and opening up into a kind of shamanic journey for ourselves, and hopefully closing anything we need to close, and getting some guidance. And then I also like to do I have this little form where I buy a bunch of glow in the dark stars, and I make a glow in the dark star labyrinth on my floor in my session space that's big enough for people to walk around. And so we do a little labyrinth journey and meditation, and then have a lot of fun mixing all the stars up and throwing them into the air, and in the pitch black, and kind of dancing and playing with them. So uh, that's the way that we traditionally welcome in what I feel is kind of like the new year in a way, because solstice marks sort of the beginning of this festival of light season, and there's about 10 days between that and New Year that is kind of the standstill time in our culture, as well as the standstill time of the sun, because whatever movement is so imperceptible early on. And it's a time for us to complete our ceremonies and, actually enter into the stillness of winter. Um, so I will be continuing these, hopefully, as we go around the wheel this year into 2026. And so I hope you can join me. Thank you for uh, liking me or doing whatever, like if this is something that feels useful for you and you enjoy kind of looking at the world through this lens. Um, okay, so see you in 2 weeks. Thanks. Bye.